start with a story developing this morning. Police say 2 people have now been arrested for the murder of the Hawks investigator Frans Mathipa, who was killed in August 2023. Mathipa was investigating claims that members of the SANDF Special Forces unit had been involved in abducting an Ethiopian businessman from the Mall of Africa. Mathipa was then shot dead while driving a moving car in what's been described as an assassination that could only have been carried out by someone with military training. Hennie van Vuuren from Open Secrets has been investigating this case for several years. Hennie, good morning. I really appreciate your time. Please start by refreshing our memories. What was Frans Mathipa investigating when he was killed in this very dramatic way?
Yeah, indeed. Good morning, Stephen. It's nearly 2 years ago in August of 2023 that Frans Mathipa was assassinated while driving along the N1 highway. He was out that evening, a fateful Sunday evening, investigating a matter he had been on the trail on for a number of months. And in particular, he was looking at the involvement of a group of special forces. So those are the top trained elite members of the South African National Defence Force, who were allegedly involved in the abduction of, as you say, an Ethiopian national, Abdiga, and his bodyguard in the Mall of Africa in late 2022. At that point, what Mathipa was trying to do, he'd gone to court, he'd followed all the due processes required of a senior member of the Hawks investigating what was a crime against the state, effectively, and he had asked for the cell phone records of a range of SANDF elite special forces members, and also was trying to track the movement of the vehicles they had been in when, at the point that Abdiga was abducted. This was July of 2023 that he was in court involved in that process. We know that at exactly that time, the SANDF, and that's the head of legal affairs, General Eric Nisi, and others were fighting tooth and nail in court to block Mathipa's efforts to seek justice. It was a very ordinary procedure that Mathipa was involved in. And effectively, I think there's good reason to argue to shield the identities and potential criminal involvement of the elite forces, the special forces members in that abduction. And that evening that he was, of course, driving on the highway when he was assassinated, it was a moving vehicle from what we understand, and he was fired with a bullet to his head. It would take a highly skilled killer, effectively a sniper, someone who's trained to be able to do that. And there are not many of those people in this country, and a number of them have had training in the special forces, of course.
I mean, it's quite a thing to assassinate a member of the Hawks in that way, never mind someone who's investigating something going on in the SANDF. I mean, wasn't there a bit of a strange silence about it? Did the Hawks, did the SANDF, did anyone talk about it much? There was at one point, I think, a press conference.
Absolutely. It was a deafening silence. We, subsequent to this Open Secrets, further investigated the matter. We found out that the person who was leading, the person who Mathipa certainly had as one of his suspects, and he'd asked for his cell phone records, a Colonel Sunnyboy Piniwambi, who is potentially linked to the assassination. He was also linked, from what we had understood, to a torture squad within the SANDF, and in one instance, that torture, we believe, led to the murder of a civilian at SANDF base in Tabatswane. So there's lots to suggest that there was a range of criminal conduct that the special forces were involved in, including real torture like we haven't heard of within the SANDF since the apartheid period, playing itself out. That is besides the murder of a top police official in Frans Mathipa. Correctly, as you say, Stephen, there was silence. There's silence from the presidency, silence from the politicians within the Ministry of Defense, but the chief of the SANDF, sitting together with his chief of intelligence and the head of military police, called a press conference in late 2023 after we had published much of these findings, and lambasted us, threatened Open Secrets as well, specifically, that we should be charged for a crime for reporting on these matters. But after that, we haven't heard a thing. And I think there has been just very clearly a cover-up within the establishment. What the Hawks have done here is incredibly brave. We know that one of the people we only don't know the identity of the two individuals at the moment. We do know that one of the people is 36 years old. That is the age of this Colonel Sonny Boy Piniwambi, who Mathipa was tracking. We don't yet know if it's definitely Wambi, but from what we understand, the Hawks Crimes Against the State team has been working quite diligently over the last 2 years to take on what is probably one of the most high-profile prosecutions in recent years. You've got elite units within the military suspected of assassinating one of the country's top cops.
Hennie, what would be behind all of this? I mean, normally when we have, cases of murder, police investigators being killed, there's either a fight for political influence. It doesn't seem like that in this case. I mean, you know more about it than I do, but I can't see that. Is there money involved? I mean, why would someone be abducting Ethiopian nationals from, of all places, the Mall of Africa? There's CCTV footage everywhere in places like that. There's a very strange thing going on here.
Yeah, there was, I think, certainly as we as Open Secrets investigated this, it wasn't only the abduction in the Mall of Africa. We traced those same vehicles 3 weeks prior to that as having been docked next to the vessel, the infamous Lady R that docked in Simonstown, which allegedly loaded weapons off from Russia. That's according to the South African government. And of course, that was a matter of major controversy. But we had linked those same vehicles that were involved in the Mall of Africa abduction to that instance. And so what we have is we see them in the scene of a range of very curious places, let's put it that. And certainly when we come to the Mall of Africa's abduction, it's a crime, the abduction of an individual who has since disappeared, to be very clear, Stephen. Abadiga and his bodyguard have never been seen since that abduction. And we have the CCTV footage from court records, which prove that at least that the vehicles were moved when they were moved, and shows Sonny Boy Piniwambi and his colleagues accompanying Abadiga effectively out of the Mall of Africa. The bigger question I think that you point to, Stephen, is if we zoom out, the bigger question is what has been the role of special forces in the subterranean parts of our politics for a number of years. We know that one of the things that Jacob Zuma did was, on top of having his special security guards, he would bring in members of special forces to guard him at Nkandla. He was paranoid about assassinations for a number of years. Now, what that effectively started doing was the increasing politicization of the military in different ways, their involvement in political shenanigans. Big open questions whether members of special forces and other members of the military were not themselves involved potentially in a range of other crimes that could benefit people in politics, people high up in government over a period of time. Those are all secrets that you want to keep buried. I think those are the kind of things that a range of politicians don't want exposed. Now, the real danger is not only would we find out whether the SANDF killed a senior Hawks official. What would then become clear is, were they protected by the chief of the SANDF, by the minister, and obviously the president? President Ramaphosa, the special forces effectively have a direct line to him, which they have had since the Mandela administration. And so there are big questions that need to be asked of a range of top politicians and the chief of the SANDF, whether they have covered up potentially this crime by their silence, and what are the other crimes that members of these special forces have been involved in. We certainly have strong evidence that it points to torture, possibly murder. We've written to the president repeatedly as Open Secrets about this, Stephen, in the last 2 years. We get no response. At the very least, we get an acknowledgement of receipt, most recently a few months ago for the very first time, but zero action. And that, I think, is very worrying. And therefore, this coming to light today in court could be the beginning of a process that could start to deal with a real, as I say, subterranean entanglement involving people with guns and people with money.
Hennie, if we have a torture squad in the Special Forces section of the SANDF, if we have them kidnapping people on CCTV, if we have all of this going on, and the head of the SANDF has said that none of this is true, that it was all lies, and it's shown, in fact, to be true. I mean, I don't know if that person could keep their job, and there would be others as well. I mean, this is a massive test for President Ramaphosa, I would imagine. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see all kinds of arguments in court about why this prosecution should not continue?
Absolutely. I think there's going to be the conservatives within the military are going to be pushing really hard. They've probably been working overnight. They'll have their legal team there. But these are high stakes for the chief of the SANDF. These are high stakes for a whole range of top officials within the military. I think that, I think it would be correct that President Ramaphosa should be sweating at the moment because it is a matter he has to grapple with. He has sat on the sidelines for too long and been too quiet. The chief of the SANDF, reports effectively to the commander-in-chief, which is President Cyril Ramaphosa. There should be an urgent meeting with him and Angie Motshekga. They together, as the Minister of Defence and the President, should be, as the politicians who we've elected, speaking to the country this week to explain what has happened with the SANDF and what clear measures they are going to take to deal with this. We know, Stephen, for example, that there was a commission of inquiry into the torture allegations, which I've spoken of. We've written repeatedly to ask for copies of that report, undertaken more than 2 years ago from within the SANDF. My understanding, that report went and lay on the desk of the chief of the SANDF, and nothing has happened as yet. So there is, one is very cautious to talk about cover-ups. But given our history of the abuse of power by the military during apartheid in South Africa, we need to be very cautious when we see this rearing its ugly head. And I think that what we've seen consistently over the last 3 years is precisely that at play. So I think the stakes are high, and rightly pressure should be placed on the president and other top politicians to act and act swiftly.
Hennie van Vuuren from Open Secrets, thank you very much indeed.